When I was 16, I shattered my brother the prince's favorite crystal goblet. For that, my own parents threw me into the burial pits to move corpses. For 3 years, I never had enough to eat. I never had warm clothes. In the end, I grew fatally ill. Then I died. But I was reborn, sent back to the very day it all began. This time, I quietly walked out of their world. And the entire palace went insane. I was reborn. The moment I opened my eyes, I was kneeling before the shattered pieces of the crystal goblet, unable to defend myself. That goblet was a tribute from the southern sea, and it was my brother Leo's most prized possession. But the real culprit was my sister, Bella, the one everyone adored. She was the one who broke it. That day, she dragged me along to sneak into the prince's quarters, saying she wanted to see the new poem he was writing. We were jostling each other when we heard the crash. She got scared and ran. I just stood there, stunned. She glanced back and said just one thing. "Alara, don't move. I'll go find Leo and apologize." But then, from behind the garden statues, I heard her crying to Leo, telling him I was the one who'd clumsily broken it. She even said if she hadn't stopped me, I would have run away. Before I could say a word, I heard a loud crack and my ears started ringing. It was my father, the king, who had slapped me. My mother, the queen, looked at me coldly. "You are an absolute disgrace." Also there that day was Ethan, the son of the Duke of Westhaven. He was my secret fiancé. My mother had arranged the marriage for me by royal decree. Later, he became Bella's husband. I wasn't blind to their favoritism. Bella and my brother Leo were the kingdom's blessed twins, seen as the glory of the royal family from the moment they were born. But I took after my grandmother, who was from a foreign land. My skin was sickly pale, my eyes an unnervingly light color, and I was quiet. They used the excuse that I was an ill omen, that I shouldn't be kept around. But I was a princess of this family. Where could they throw me? So they raised me in a corner of the palace, starving me, freezing me, never once showing they cared. After the goblet incident, I was sentenced to 3 days without food. The royal physicians never even came to check on me. Word spread through the capital. My father raged that I was graceless and immoral, so he readily took the prince's advice. He sent me to a rival kingdom as a political hostage. I was forced to go to Jiria. One night, war broke out between our kingdoms. No one told me. No one came to get me. And so there I was in a foreign land, a target for all their hatred. Whenever their army suffered a defeat, they took it out on me. Every day, I moved bodies, hauled bones from the battlefield, and was thrown into the burial pits to atone for the honor of my kingdom. The winter I came down with a lung disease. I found a jade pendant on a nameless corpse. I got on my knees, bowed my head to the ground 3 times, then traded it for some money to write a letter home. All I asked was for them to bring me home. The reply came 3 days later. It was in my father's own hand. "You are a princess. It is your duty to serve the state. Stop being so delicate." My mother added her own note. "Your brother and Bella are working tirelessly every day because of the war. Why must you cause trouble at a time like this?" Leo's was even worse. "The Jirian prince in our palace is treated as an honored guest. Why must you exaggerate so much?" In their eyes, I deserved to suffer. Because I was the outcast. Not a blessing, but a curse. That day, the enemy army broke through the last city where I was being held. I wrapped myself in a fur cloak and went out to greet the family I had longed for. But the one who put an arrow through my heart was Prince Leo. He sat high on his warhorse, looking down at me coldly. Who is this Jirian woman? How pathetic. In that moment, I finally died. To be reborn on this day was a mercy from the heavens. Starting from this life, I would no longer be the family's shadow, no longer the royal family's sacrificial lamb. I would live. I would live well. This time, fate seemed to want to mock me one more time. The crystal goblet shattered again, the sharp sound like a needle piercing my heart. I looked up at Prince Leo. His hand didn't move, but I already flinched and shut my eyes. But the familiar slap never came. He just frowned, his voice low and hesitant. "Alara, are you wearing winter clothes?" I looked down and said nothing. It was the height of summer, but my clothes were thick, coarse and fraying at the seams. The color was drab and depressing. Compared to Bella's gown of sheer snow-white silk, so light it seemed to stir the breeze. I looked like a beggar who had wandered into the palace by mistake. Leo stared at me, his expression suddenly complex, filled with emotions I couldn't decipher. He didn't speak again. Maybe he thought I was dirty. And Bella, my dear sister, opened her mouth, ready to pin the blame on me just like last time. But suddenly, she couldn't get the words out, as if her tongue had been nailed down. She just stared at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes. It was like waking from a nightmare. I have some new fabric, Bella said suddenly in a low voice. I'll make a new dress for you. Hearing this, a small smile played on my lips. She had played this role of the caring, gentle sister for so long. Whenever our parents were around, she would make me wear new clothes while she wore old ones. Then she'd cry and say, I have nothing left for myself. And just like that, she'd get the newest, most expensive things from our mother. She was clever, and I was weak. I became her stepping stone. But this time, I wasn't playing along. I politely declined. No thank you, sister, I said quietly. I'm used to these clothes. No exposing her, no fighting. No more trying to please, no more illusions. Then I slowly knelt. Your Highness, it was my fault. I bumped into it by accident. I bowed my head, my tone so docile it was almost degrading. Please punish me. Leo was stunned. Everyone was stunned. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I didn't even wait for them to speak. In my last life, my sister's words sent me to my grave. The burial pit was my bed, the lash marks my blanket. I begged. I wrote letters. All I got in return was, you are a princess. It is your duty to serve the state. Now, I wasn't begging anymore. If I couldn't escape it, I would meet it head on. I slammed my forehead hard against the stone floor. Once. Twice. 3 times. Blood seeped from my brow, trickled down my face, and dripped onto the white jade tiles, blooming like a startling crimson flower. Bella panicked. She rushed over, trying to stop me. No, it wasn't her. It was me. I broke it. It was my fault. Prince Leo reached out to pull me up, but I shook him off. I heard footsteps in the distance, getting closer and closer. My father, my mother, and the young duke had all arrived. But I still didn't look up. In my past life, I argued, but no one believed me. After dying once, I finally understood. Their love was a light that would never shine on me. If this life was destined to be a trap, then I would be the one to spring it. They wanted to save face. I'd give them that. They wanted a sinner. I'd be that sinner. The sight of me, covered in blood, shocked them all. The young duke was the first to rush forward, clumsily helping me up. His hands were trembling, as if he was afraid of hurting me, and afraid I'd kneel again. My father stood there, his face darker than a thundercloud. His voice was sharp. What is going on here? The prince and Bella said nothing, their heads bowed low. As far as I could remember, this was the first time they had ever been scolded. I thought they would storm off, burst into tears, or even turn on me right then and there. But they didn't. This time they were eerily quiet, as if their consciences had suddenly awakened, or as if they were scared. My mother walked over, raising her hand to wipe the blood from my face. I instinctively shrank back, my whole body tensing. I didn't even dare to blink. I thought she was going to hit me. That's what she always did. Her tenderness was reserved for my sister, Bella. She couldn't tolerate my mistakes, but if Bella was even slightly frightened, she'd raise hell throughout the palace. But this time, she looked at me and started to cry. Tears streamed down her face, her voice trembling uncontrollably. Alara, it's my fault. I was terrified. I thought the blood was disgusting her. I kept backing away. I looked down at my own pathetic state, and suddenly raised my hand and slapped myself hard. My lips trembled. I'm sorry, Mother. My blood is dirty. I'm sorry I scared you. The crisp sound echoed through the hall. My mother lunged forward and hugged me, her voice so hoarse it was almost broken. No, that's not what I meant. But how did you become like this? My father came over and knelt, trying to comfort me. I dropped to my knees again, the movement numb and practiced, as if kneeling was second nature. My voice was faint, but I tried to control its tremor. It was my fault. Please, Father, punish me. King Theron's gaze tightened. He raised his hand as if to scold me, but though his lips moved, not a single word came out. His throat worked, and finally, all he could manage was, "You are a princess of this kingdom. Don't be so pathetic. How could you? How could you let yourself live like this?" But I could barely hear him anymore. I was young, chronically malnourished, and had lost too much blood. Suddenly, my vision went black, and my body went limp. In the last moment before I passed out, I saw them all gathered around me. The prince, my sister, my mother, my father. Even Ethan was kneeling beside me. Their faces were etched with a panic and self-reproach I had never seen before. I smiled. It had to be a hallucination. I told myself it was just another dream. A dream too extravagant, too unreal to be true. But in the dream, I was back in my previous life. On the day I was sent from the palace, I knelt by the carriage, begging and pleading just to see my father and mother one last time. But they wouldn't see me. They wouldn't even let me see their shadows. The day after I left, the Duke I adored, Ethan, held a grand engagement ceremony with Bella. Red candles burned high. Music filled the air with joy. And I began my journey to the rival kingdom. Before I even entered the city, one of their young nobles knocked out one of my teeth. They made me fight dogs for food. After that, the sound of a dog barking was enough to make me tremble. I wrote countless letters home, sometimes just begging for a familiar maid to come stay with me, sometimes just for a single word of comfort. But every request was denied. Then the war started. I thought I would finally be brought home. Instead, they ordered me, a princess who had barely been schooled, to pass them intelligence. All alone. No subordinates. No guards. The outcome was predictable. I was discovered by the enemy. The first day I was thrown into the burial pit, I felt broken bones under my feet and smelled the stench of rot. The nights were filled with blood and screams. I developed a high fever, scared out of my mind, haunted by dreams of severed limbs and a world painted red. Then, someone was shaking me awake. I opened my eyes. I was in my own bedchamber, on the large sandalwood bed. A soft, clean silk quilt was draped over me. On the table sat a steaming platter of braised venison, its rich sauce glistening under the light, the aroma filling the room. It was a brilliant red. I only had to look at it for my stomach to churn violently. It made me remember the burial pits, the festering, rotting limbs piled high. The image of flies crawling over bloody flesh overlapped with the food on the plate. In the next second, I leaned over and vomited, retching so hard that tears streamed from my eyes. "Alara!" My mother's voice was filled with panic and a slight tremor. Before I could explain, my father's face hardened. "You're so weak right now. Why won't you eat properly? This venison will restore your strength. How will you recover if you don't eat?" With that, he took a spoon himself and began forcing it into my mouth, spoonful after spoonful. I struggled, but it was no use. I choked down a single bite. The moment the meat hit my stomach, my body rebelled. I barely had time to breathe before I was bent over, heaving again. The bed, my clothes, the carpet, everything was a mess. The royal physician was summoned. His face changed the moment he saw me. He fell to his knees. "Your Highness, the princess's digestion is extremely weak. She can barely handle a simple egg custard. This rich food is far too much for her. If she is forced to eat, I fear her health will be permanently damaged." My father and mother were speechless. In that moment, they were panicked. Truly panicked. They apologized over and over, comforting me with gentle, careful words, as if they weren't the same people who had so callously sent me away that night. I didn't say anything. I just looked up and surveyed the familiar palace room. Something was different. The windows, once drafty and cold, had been repapered with the finest lantern paper. The chipped vase that had sat in the corner for years was gone, replaced by a gold-inlaid, jade-trimmed incense burner. The once barren room was now filled with hanging tapestries, soft divans, and warm stoves. Even the legs of the bed were wrapped in mink fur. I reached out and touched the white tiger skin blanket covering me. It was warm and soft. Too unreal. Then I looked at them. My father, my mother, my brother, my sister, Ethan. Each of them wore a look of guilt. I finally understood. They had been reborn too. But what did that matter? They came back with regret. I came back with the memory of having died once, of having my bones ground to dust before I decided to truly live. I no longer yearned for their love. I had no desire to beg for it. I quietly noted the locations of all the gold and jewels in the room, calculating how much money they would fetch. Enough for me to get far away? Could I find a peaceful life outside the palace? Even if I couldn't take any of it, I'd rather go out and be a farmer, or even a beggar. I'd accept that, as long as I could leave this place. Before I could say a word, more treasures started pouring in. Pearls, agates, jeweled hairpins, fragrant powders, they piled up in the corner of my room, strangely decorated with large, red symbols of joy. Then Ethan walked in, impeccably dressed, his expression solemn. He held a royal decree and performed a formal bow, his gaze fixed on me with conviction. Princess Alara, I wish to take you as my wife and protect you for the rest of your life. The hall erupted in applause, full of blessings and joy. Alara has adored Ethan since she was a child. It's wonderful they can finally be together. Ethan, if you ever mistreat my sister, I will never forgive you. This is wonderful. Alara is so fortunate. She will have a long and happy life with many children. Happy? I stared for a moment. Before me was a young man's gentle smile, my parents' pleased gazes, Leo and Bella clapping and cheering. But all I felt was cold. As cold as that winter night in the enemy kingdom, when I huddled in a dirt pit wrapped in rags, scraping at rotten meat with a broken bowl. I looked up, my voice flat, without a trace of hesitation. I refuse. Everyone stared at me in disbelief. The warmth in Ethan's eyes shattered, replaced by confusion and hurt. Even my mother tried to persuade me gently. Alara, don't be difficult. Didn't you love Ethan when you were little? You used to say his name in your sleep. I laughed, a laugh as cold as rain seeping into bone. They all thought I was just throwing a tantrum. They thought because I had suffered, my heart was closed off, but that I wasn't serious. No one knew that I was no longer the little girl who would blush over a piece of pastry, who would secretly hide away snacks she had made with her own hands. I looked down at the jade pendant symbolizing our engagement, glowing softly in the candlelight. Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as he held it out to me. Alara, I'm serious. This time, I won't let you go. I felt like I was hearing an echo from my past life. He had said, you're too reckless. Bella is much more graceful. Alara, why do you always try to compete with your sister? You'll never be as good as her. I had once foolishly believed in those 4 words, a match made in heaven. Because Ethan and I were born on the same day, people in the palace often joked that we were a golden couple, destined for each other. He was handsome and gentle. I used to think that marrying someone like him would bring me happiness. He liked almond pastries, so I secretly went to the royal kitchens to learn how to make them. After a long time, I finally made one that looked and tasted right, just to surprise him. But he only gave it a passing glance before saying, if Bella made this, it would surely be better. He had always been in love with my sister, Bella. He loved her poise, her elegance, her damsel in distress act. In the end, he got his wish and married her. I became the most undignified chapter of his past on his path to success. But their marriage crumbled in less than 7 years. Bella's arrogance clashed with his pride, and their life became an endless cycle of arguments and pain. They eventually divorced. Now they were offering me her leftovers. He was no prize. After marrying, he took on several concubines. And now, they wanted to shove me back into that same cycle. I looked at the young duke with his complicated expression, at my family whose eyes all seemed to say, she's just being stubborn. I suddenly felt exhausted. Stop talking, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room's chorus of persuasion. I lifted my head, my gaze as cold as frost, and swept it over each of them. I know you've all been reborn too. The words fell, and it was as if someone had choked the air out of the hall, plunging it into a dead silence. You think I'm just sulking. You think I'm the same as before, that all it takes is one he wants to marry you, and I'll smile and agree. But I don't want it anymore. Their expressions shifted from shock to panic, from disbelief to a desperate attempt to hide the truth. Prince Leo gripped the teacup beside him so tightly his knuckles turned white. Bella's face went pale, a flash of fear in her eyes. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. I slowly stood up and brushed the gold dust from my sleeves, as if shaking off all my old fantasies and hopes. Since we've all been given a second chance, this time, let me choose my own fate. I have no intention of spending the rest of my life paying for your regrets. Everyone fell silent. My father was the first to break the stillness in the room. So, Elara, you remember everything. I looked at them and repeated, word for word, I was reborn too. I remember everything from my last life. My mother seemed to break down completely. She threw herself at my hands, sobbing. I'm sorry. We were wrong. We never imagined. We treated their hostage prince with every luxury, but we never thought Jiria would treat you like that. You were just a child. She cried so hard she could barely breathe, tears and mucus streaking her makeup. She had always been so concerned with her appearance, but now she looked as disheveled as any common mother who had lost her child. I said nothing. The young Duke Ethan also took a step forward, his eyes red, his voice raw. Elara, it was me. I didn't understand love back then. It was only after you left that I realized you were the warmest light in my life. I never met anyone else who would remember that I liked almond pastries, who would brave the cold to help me find my lost jade ring in the snow. There seemed to be genuine regret in his eyes, but my heart was a frozen lake. Prince Leo, however, suddenly scowled in frustration. He pushed everyone aside and dropped to his knees before me with a thud, slamming his head against the floor. I'm sorry, Elara. That day, I really was going to get you. I didn't expect you to be dressed like that, in those thin, dirty clothes. I didn't recognize you. And in the end, when I found out that the dead rebel was you, his voice broke. His fingers dug into the floor tiles, knuckles white. I went mad. Elara, I went mad. Ethan sneered. You call that going mad? You're the one who gave the order. You said the traitor deserved to die, that her body should be left exposed, and her head displayed on the city gates for 3 days as a public warning. Leo whipped his head around, roaring, You shut up. But Ethan shouted back through gritted teeth. You stripped her of her clothes, cut off her head, and hung it in the snow and wind for 3 days and 3 nights. All because she was your greatest victory, a prize for you to show off. It was only when I saw the mole under her eye that I knew it was Elara. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't angry. I just said calmly, I'm not surprised. I thought to myself about all the bodies I had moved in the burial pits. Some only had half a face left. Compared to them, I was lucky. The two were still arguing, shouting, consumed by shame and anger. But then Bella suddenly fell to her knees. She was wailing, barely able to catch her breath. I'm the one who should be apologizing the most. Back then, I was just jealous that you were so carefree. Jealous that you always got attention for being the youngest. I thought sending you away would be a little prank. I didn't know you would actually die. As she spoke, she drew the sword from Ethan's belt, held it with both hands, and tremblingly placed it before me. Elara, I know you hate me. If you want to kill me to vent your anger, then do it. I won't move. I won't blame you. Everyone froze. They thought I would cry, tremble, refuse. They thought I'd say, it's in the past. I don't hold a grudge. But I just glanced at her and said coolly, all right. I really did pick up the sword. Without hesitation. The blade flashed as I swung it toward her neck. Stop. My father was the first to rush over, snatching the sword from my hand. He thrust his own blade between me and Bella to block the blow. In the process, the edge of his sword caught my face. A line of blood appeared, slanting from my cheekbone. It stung with a searing heat. The air itself seemed to turn red for a moment. Physician! Someone get the physician! My mother screamed, pressing a hand to my face, her fingers trembling. Elara, don't be scared, don't be scared. Mother will get the physician for you right now. But I stood perfectly still. I didn't move. I didn't cry out in pain. It's fine, I said, my voice as calm as a girl twice my age. A little blood is nothing. Everyone was in a panic. The physician rushed in and fell to his knees to examine the wound, shaking his head. Your Highness, the wound is too deep. I'm afraid it will leave a scar. My mother's face went white. My father's brow furrowed so deeply it looked like he might snap the sword in his hands. It's my fault. I acted too hastily. Elara, I'm sorry, he said, his face full of guilt. But then he turned his gaze to Bella. Your sister was wrong, he said gravely, but her crime doesn't warrant death. I laughed, my eyes empty. So you're saying I deserve to die? That I deserve to be sent away from the palace, handed over to our enemies like a gift, treated like a toy, and left to die in a burial pit without anyone knowing? I closed my eyes, my mind flooding with the memory of those years filled with the stench of death. You have no idea. When I first went to the neighboring kingdom, they treated me quite well, I said, my voice low and slow. The food and clothes were better than what I had in the palace. I once thought I was a child abandoned by fate, but after leaving the palace, I briefly tasted a bit of what felt like cosmic compensation. I ate well, I was warm, and I was more comfortable than I ever was at home. For a while, I almost thought I had escaped the abyss. I really believed I had been saved, but I was too naive. It turns out the king of that country only treated me well, because he still saw me as a valuable pawn. Until one day, our two princes played a game of chess. Our kingdom won. There's lost face, lost dignity. And then they took their anger out on me. I went from honored guest to unwanted baggage overnight. That day, I was summoned to their palace. Before I could understand what was happening, I was publicly thrown into the servants' quarters. No explanation, no goodbyes. The same court ladies who used to smile and bow to me suddenly changed, cursing me with the foulest language and punishing me with the filthiest chores. Kneeling on stones, cleaning latrines, wearing rags, eating spoiled food. Every single one of them wanted to grind me into the dirt. I used to think that was the worst it could get. But the truth is, every worse was just a prelude to something even worse. Once, I was kicked to the ground for not sweeping the snow properly. Then they said I was too arrogant, too clean to be a proper captive. I remember it was the dead of winter, the cold like a razor blade. I was wearing only a thin, tattered robe, my body covered in frostbite. They put an iron chain around my neck, the kind used for dogs, and tied me to a fence, slowly forcing me to my knees. I can still hear the clanking of that chain, each sound like a hammer blow to my bones. I was starving, but the dog lunged at me, tearing at my sleeves, biting my hands. I didn't dare scream. I just clutched the food bowl, holding it tight against my chest. They stood nearby, laughing. Aren't you a princess? Eat. Don't you people from Viridia love dog food? I kept my head down, curled up in the corner of the dog cage, my fingers gripping the iron bars so tightly my nails tore off, blood dripping from my knuckles into the mud. But I didn't dare let go. I knew if I let go, it wouldn't just be the food I'd lose. It could be my life. But you still killed their peace envoy, without even giving me an excuse. The Jirian royal family sent me to the burial pits, because they knew I was useless. My own family in Viridia had completely disregarded my safety. That day, I bit down on the iron chain with all my might, willing to break my teeth before I let go. But I was a neglected, malnourished girl. How could I fight against a dozen strong men? By the time they brutally dragged me away, there wasn't a patch of healthy skin left on my body. When I finished, my chest felt hollow, as if I had poured out all the blood and mud from the burial pits. And this magnificent, opulent palace hall suddenly fell so quiet you could hear every single heartbeat. My father's eyes were bloodshot, his lips moving, but no words came out. My mother was already soaked in tears, her hands on my shoulders, trembling as she whispered my name over and over. Alara, Alara. Leo stood frozen, as if struck by lightning, muttering, I didn't know, I really didn't know. The young duke clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white, but he couldn't say a word. I looked at them, watching them drown in regret, pain, and remorse. Good. They should know. They should know just how miserably the Alara who gave everything for them, who was as insignificant as dust, had died. A scar doesn't matter, I said calmly. It's good for you to see it. So you don't forget what I look like again. So you remember I don't look like a princess. I paused, then added, you said her crime didn't warrant death. But in our last life, you didn't seem to feel that way about me, did you? The only difference is I came back alive. But I really did die. At first, the burial pit wasn't so crowded. The bodies were just scattered around, mostly bones and bloody, mangled limbs left to rot. Flies buzzed around them constantly. Sometimes you'd see a corpse so decayed it only had half a face left, its eyes bulging and mouth open, as if it was trying to scream for help before it died. The first time they threw me in, I hadn't even found my footing before I stepped on something soft. I looked down and saw it was the body of a child. Its eyes were wide open, its tongue hanging out of its mouth. In that moment, I nearly went insane. I threw up for a whole day. I was covered in the smell of corpse fluid. My dreams were full of blood and the stench of death. When I woke up, even my breath smelled of rot. But it was there that I met an old man. He was one of the first civilians sent to move the bodies. He saw I was young and thin as a stick, that I couldn't even hold a shovel properly, and he took pity on me. He would give me the lightest tasks and secretly boil some water in an old pot in the morning so I could wash my face. "You're still so young," he'd say. "Don't be afraid, even if you can't go back. Grandpa will protect you." In his blood and mud-caked hands, I felt a warmth that was almost like family. But the good times didn't last. The war escalated, and bodies piled up faster than we could bury them. The pit became the antechamber to hell. We dug a dozen pits a day, dragged dozens of corpses. Every breath was the smell of blood and rotting flesh. And then his own son died on the battlefield. That day he sat by the bodies, staring silently at the sky. After the messenger left, he gave me a cold look, all the warmth gone from his voice. "So you're the enemy princess." From that day on, he never gave me hot water again. He dumped the heaviest, filthiest jobs on me. The other men, who had been wary of me before, started getting bolder. When we moved bodies, their hands would accidentally wander to my waist, my back. I was terrified and tried to avoid them, to work alone. But as a young girl, I could only hide for so long. They became more brazen. One night, they barged into my tent, reeking of alcohol, laughing as they tore at my clothes. I fought for my life that night, scratching their faces with my nails, and managed to keep the last layer of my clothing intact. I didn't dare sleep for 3 days and 3 nights after that. Every footstep, every rustle of the tent flap, I thought it was them coming back for me. I stopped eating. I didn't dare bathe. My hair became a matted mess. I looked like a madwoman. One time, after lunch, I felt so sick I had to wash my face. A drunken soldier walked over. Well, the little princess cleaned herself up today. Smells nice." I turned and ran, but he pounced on me like a leopard, slamming me into the mud. Fists rained down on me. I bit down hard, not daring to even scream. He finally left after knocking out a few of my teeth, cursing as he went. I lay on the ground, spitting out a mouthful of blood, but I felt a sliver of relief. At least I was still clean. No one had truly touched me. I was still alive. But I never expected that the ones who would ultimately destroy my reputation would be my own family. The day I died, they had me beheaded as a rebel. My body was hung on the city gates, barely clothed, my head impaled on a spear. And they all said it was a great victory, a cause for reward. Now, I looked at the group of people in front of me, drowning in their regret, and touched the still bleeding wound on my face. It hurt. But the scar on my face was nothing compared to the chasm in my heart. I never really intended to kill Bella. I just wanted to see how they would react. And they hadn't changed at all. They pushed me aside, protected her, and stopped me. Every single action was suffocatingly familiar. My father looked at me, his voice trembling with sorrow. "Alara, you can have anything you want. Just ask, and I will give it to you." I lowered my lashes and spoke softly. "Then revoke my royal sash." The air in the room froze. My father's voice, usually so commanding, now trembled like a candle in the wind. "Alara, that sash is the symbol of your status. You are of royal blood. How can you?" I cut him off. My voice was calm, cold, a frozen wasteland. "I don't want it anymore." The words were final. "You once told me to be proud of this bloodline, but you also used it to send me to a rival kingdom as a hostage. And in the end, you used it to have me stripped naked, beheaded, and displayed on the city gates." I spoke each word slowly, my voice quiet but sharp as a dagger, cutting into their hearts. "This royal blood, I paid for it with my life. My debt is settled, isn't it?" I looked at them one by one. Those familiar yet cold faces were finally showing panic. My father's face turned ashen. My mother's tears fell endlessly. My brother the prince dropped to the floor with a thud. not even noticing the blood starting to flow from his forehead. Alara, he rasped. Don't be like this. Don't say such things. Whatever you want, we'll give it to you. A sarcastic smile touched my lips. You want me to name my price? Fine. I want to study under General Cole. I want to learn martial arts. General Cole was our kingdom's greatest warrior, his skills unmatched in all the land. As soon as the words left my mouth, the hall fell silent. A second later, my mother's crying started again. But this time it wasn't racking sobs, but a choked, disbelieving plea. Alara, you're a girl. Why would you want to learn to use swords and spears? That's a man's work. You've been frail since you were a child. Training would be so hard, so damaging to your health. Alara, I know you're angry, but you can't push yourself like this just for the sake of revenge. As I listened, my eyes grew colder. This time they didn't argue. I pressed my advantage. Then I'll continue. I don't want to see any of you again. And I don't need your compensation. From this day on, just pretend I really did die. My mother cried so hard she nearly fainted, shaking her head as she crawled over to grab my hand, her sobs tearing through the air. No. Alara, it's a gift from heaven that you're still alive. Child, please give us a chance. I'm begging you. But I looked down at her, my voice as light as a feather. Then this time, let Bella go to Jiria in my place. The room suddenly fell quiet. A terrifyingly cold quiet. Even my mother's sobs stopped in an instant. I scanned the hall, my gaze frigid. What's wrong? You all said I could have anything. But the moment I mentioned Bella, you can't seem to speak. So, your apologies were just a joke you tell your conscience. Then let's try something else. Give me the abandoned estate outside the capital. It will be mine. It will be more convenient for my training. They finally nodded. I got what I wanted and left the palace without a backward glance. I sent back every servant they sent me. All of them. I didn't trust their tears. I didn't trust their regret. I didn't trust the sight of them weeping over my old clothes. Those feelings came too late. They were too light, too thin. Colder than the blood in the burial pits. I hired my own people, interviewed them myself, investigated their backgrounds and vetted their loyalty. I only used those I could trust completely. I understood one thing very clearly. This world was ruled by the strong. I was once a pearl in their hands, yet they tossed me into the mud without a second thought. If I didn't become strong now, I would be the one trampled underfoot next time. I trained day and night, through wind and rain. It was true that my body was weak, but my tolerance for pain was beyond what most people could comprehend. Because I had already died once. I had already clawed my way out of death. General Cole didn't think much of me at first. But when he passed the training grounds late one night, and saw me still swinging my sword through gritted teeth, he stood there for a long time. Finally, he said, "You are no ordinary person." Later, he told everyone, "This woman is the most terrifying martial arts prodigy I have ever seen." But I just laughed at myself. It's not talent. It's experience. The kind you get from snatching food from the jaws of dogs, from escaping the boots of enemy soldiers, from crawling your way over a mountain of corpses. Bones make the best whetstones. While I trained, I studied strategy, formations, and tactics. I often had a feeling that the war wasn't over, that it would come back. And sure enough, 2 years later, Jiria sent its armies again. They were like a different nation, mobilizing their forces, swallowing our border territories. Their advance was unstoppable. In just a few months, they had taken 3 provinces. I knew then that the kingdom of Jiria had been reborn too. The entire court was in a panic. The army's morale was shattered. When their forces reached the capital, I was urgently summoned back to the palace. I looked at the high walls, the green tiles, the golden bricks and carved beams, a place I once longed for. Now it was just cold and desolate. The floor was covered in the shards of crystal goblets, reflecting a blinding light in the sun. A maid told me my brother had smashed them himself. He had gone mad, smashing them every day, muttering, "She's not coming back. She's never coming back." When I walked into the throne room, everyone looked at me as if they'd seen a ghost or a god. They'd all gone mad. But when they saw me, their eyes turned red. My father choked out, "Alara, you're finally." But my brother suddenly pushed him aside and crawled toward my feet like a madman. I'm begging you, Alara. Can you just die one more time? This time we'll save you. We promise. And then we'll win back our lands. Just do it for the kingdom. Please. I found it laughable. Alara, don't worry, we will make it up to you, was the first thing the young duke said when he saw me, asking me to die again while talking about making amends. They really knew how to strike a bargain. They tried to grab me. I threw off their hands, my eyes like daggers. I don't need it. They tried to use my royal status to pressure me, calling me the blood of the kingdom, their pearl, their lost and found treasure, and saying I should die again to gamble on a chance for a do-over. All for the sake of their power and wealth. The enemy had the sense to evolve, while they, with far greater strength than Jiria, had done nothing. They had brought this ruin upon themselves. I sneered and shook off the hands reaching for me. From my robes, I pulled out the shimmering gold sash, the symbol of my royal blood. With a sharp rip, the intricate gold threads tore in my fingers, the sound echoing in the vast hall. I dropped the broken sash and stood up, speaking with cold indifference. From this day forward, I have nothing to do with any of you. While they were still stunned, the drums outside the hall began to beat. A troop of fully armed guards marched in, clad in black armor, their eyes sharp. At their head was none other than General Cole, the man who had been listed as killed in action in the battle reports. They stared in shock at him standing alive beside me, watched as I calmly gave the orders. Deploy the troops. Full strategic mobilization. The enemy is attacking from 3 sides. Send the Northwest Army to meet them head-on. The reserves will flank them through the canyon pass. Send the order. Not one of them leaves our kingdom alive. This time, no one was deciding my fate for me. It was me commanding 3 armies, fighting a decisive battle on the border. I knew the enemy's tactics better than anyone. I had been their hostage. I was a half-dead soul who had escaped their burial pits. I knew how they thought, I knew their weaknesses, and I knew their greed and madness. Soon the enemy retreated. The city erupted in cheers. The people were ecstatic. My father, mother, brother, and sister looked at me with tears in their eyes, saying I was truly chosen by destiny. But I just waved a hand, my expression calm. Take them away. Confine them. The guards obeyed without a moment's hesitation. Everyone stared at me in disbelief. But there I was, dressed in black and gold armor, holding a phoenix-crested longsword, sitting on the throne that had once been reserved only for men. I was crowned empress. In this new life, I hadn't wasted a single moment. I pressed my advantage, donned my armor, and charged onto the battlefield. I personally sent every person who had laughed at me, insulted me, hurt me, or betrayed me to their graves. I led my army, swept through the enemy kingdom, conquered their lands, and took their capital. The rival nation was destroyed. The world was united under one rule. However, a mere 3 months after my coronation, my former family changed their tune. They said a mere woman shouldn't sit on the throne. They said even though I had won the war, I should return the crown and let my father or my brother rule. They said I had done my duty to the nation, and now it was time for me to step down, get married, have children, and enjoy the proper destiny of a woman. They even had the nerve to say they would make it up to me. Listening to them, I found it all absurd. My smile grew colder. You want to make it up to me? After I came back from the burial pits, the only things I wanted were freedom and dignity. I took them back with my own 2 hands. And now you're telling me I should step down and hand this empire back to you? I didn't say another word. I simply issued a decree. They were to be confined to a distant palace, never to set foot in court again. I was in control of this country. The court obeyed me, the army was mine, and the people supported me. I spent 3 years developing sea trade, promoting agriculture, building canals, rooting out corruption, and reforming the military. The empire flourished like never before. The people were prosperous and at peace. Neighboring states sent envoys to pay tribute. But I never truly enjoyed freedom. My coronation marked the end of my war, but the beginning of a different kind of cage. They could no longer control me, but I was still bound by the responsibilities of a ruler. So I wrote my final decree, passing the throne to a capable woman from a distant branch of the royal family. She was not of high birth, but she understood warfare and politics, and had a brilliant mind. She would go further than I ever could. And I finally rode out into the world. I wore silver armor and rode a warhorse, and at my back were thousands of miles of a prosperous empire. I had money, and I had time. I ate the finest food, stayed in the best homes, and saw the most beautiful sights. I met many people on my travels. Some admired me, some confessed their love for me, but I could never tell what was real. In my last life, I had trusted everyone and been wrong. In this life, I trusted only myself. Eventually, I made peace with it. Being alone was good. Free. At ease. Owing nothing, waiting for nothing, and fearing no harm. Over the years, I would occasionally receive letters from my family. It was always the same old story. They missed me. They regretted what they did. They would give up everything for me. I'd open the letters, glance at them, and then toss them into the fire. I had no time to deal with the past. The road ahead was longer, and the world was more beautiful. Someone once asked me, "Don't you have any regrets?" I looked out at the mountainside covered in peach blossoms and smiled. Regrets? A branch that's never been tested by the wind will never blossom. I grew out of blood, and that's why my bloom is so magnificent. I was no one's destination, and no one's regret. I was just myself, and I had become my own magnificent storm. The end.